Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska are coming to us today to talk a little bit about the Golden Dome initiative. That Golden Dome Act announced today with you and several other Republican members of the Senate. Tell us a little bit about the impetus for this measure and the security goals that you hope to accomplish.
Well, Augusta, we think it's a really important measure, and I think all you have to do is look at what's going on in the world, like in the last few days. And that is, you've seen the Iron Dome in Israel protecting Israeli citizens. By the way, a lot of Americans are there, hundreds of thousands, so protecting American citizens in Israel, protecting our troops in the Middle East and Qatar. And that system is something that we think we need for our country. So President Trump has actually been working on this. I've been working on this issue with him during the first term, very much during his second term. And so what we have going on right now, which is, I think, really, really important, is a new system to address the new challenges. You know, Alaska's always been the cornerstone of America's missile defense. All the ground-based missile interceptors protecting our whole country are in Alaska. The big radar systems are all in Alaska because of our strategic location. But the threat is new. It's not just ballistic missiles, which is what's always been the big challenge from rogue nations, North Korea, Iran, but it's hypersonics, it's cruise missiles, it's drones, it's heck, even balloons, spy balloons. So this new system that we're putting together, the Golden Dome, first is based on what President Trump has been doing. He put out an executive order on this. He is demonstrating presidential leadership to make this a reality. Second, in the budget reconciliation bill, which we're literally working on right now, and hopefully we'll probably have a vote this weekend on it. It's got a lot on national defense, about $25 billion for the down payment for the Golden Dome. And then third, importantly, is authorizing legislation. That's my bill called the Golden Dome Act, which has all the elements of this that we want to get into law to drive the development of this system, which I like to describe as a layered system. So it's going to use the existing infrastructure in Alaska. We're still going to be the cornerstone of missile defense for the country, but it's going to build on that with different systems around the country, THAAD, Patriot, Aegis missile systems. And then importantly, it's going to integrate space-based, both detection and interceptors. And it's going to do this all through what they call an open architecture process, meaning open software development that can integrate these different systems and protect the whole country. So we're off to a really good start. I think the American people are seeing how important this is. And as I said in the press conference today, we have the technology to do this. We're the only country in the world that can, and we should do it. The threats to our country are very significant. They're increasing, and we should really, as one of the first responsibilities of the Congress, take the action, working really closely with the president. I was just over in the Oval Office a couple weeks ago when he was announcing elements of this bill. I was with him at that press conference in the Oval Office, working together with the administration and our members of Congress to have a Golden Dome for our country that will protect Americans, protect Alaskans. We are off to a really good start on this.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Of course, this measure comes with a massive price tag. That $25 billion is just an initial investment through the budget reconciliation bill. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the president said the initial price tag was going to be, or the initial total was $175 billion. I was scrubbing around trying to find other estimates for the cost of this project, which, as you described, is a massive improvement in or upgrade or change to the way our nation does both physical missile defense, also a lot of data upgrades and information system upgrades to our national defense. However, I'm having a hard time pinning down an actual cost. Is there a ceiling to what this could cost? Senator Tim Sheehy of Montana is quoted in a Fox News article suggesting the cost could go into the hundreds of billions of dollars. I guess in this moment where all three branches of federal government are focusing on reducing spending, this is a very expensive project. How are you justifying the two priorities?
Well, look, I think one of the most important things the federal government does is protect the people, provide the national defense for America, and that requires protecting us. And the threat has clearly grown, and we've seen that over the years. And so we need to step up to protect our country. So right now the cost, and this is over a number of years, is about 175 billion. That is a lot. But if you look at our bill, one of the things that we've done, Augusta, is really emphasize kind of off the shelf commercial technology. We have a whole new suite of new defense technology companies, not just the big traditional primes, but newer startups who I think are going to drive down the cost of this project. So the estimates, that's a lot of money, 175 billion over a number of years. There's no doubt about it. I think the provisions we have in the bill to increase competition, to encourage the Pentagon to bring in off-the-shelf technology that already exists, I actually think we can drive down those costs. But look, protecting the American people from these kind of threats, and we know that they're real, is, I think, one of the most important things we can do. And I think a lot of Alaskans currently take a lot of pride in this, because right now we are the state, we're the cornerstone of missile defense. We're the state protecting Chicago, New York City, Miami today from ballistic missile threats. That's what our 49th Missile Defense Battalion does at Fort Greely. We just had a huge Missile Defense Agency exercise with the brand new Clear Air Space Force Station long-range discrimination radar. Yet just yesterday that tested flawlessly its first intercept in terms of the ability to track an intercontinental ballistic missile. That just happened yesterday, didn't make hardly any news, really important. So we have the ability to do it. The costs are significant, but I think when it comes to protecting the people of the country, that's something we want to invest in, and that's what this bill does.
I think the question of, it's a question of priority and also a question of timing. Why are our current missile defense systems inadequate right now?
Yes.
Can you describe those inadequacies?
The answer to that is definitely yes. Our current missile defense system, as I mentioned, is really designed to counter ballistic missiles. So just think of like a missile that travels in an arc, right? An intercontinental ballistic missile. That's what we are focused on. That's what the system in Alaska is focused on. The threat has dramatically changed with regard to hypersonic missiles. So these are missiles that fly at a much flatter trajectory at like super duper high speeds of sound. At cruise missiles, which are almost the opposite, they fly at a flatter trajectory, much slower. In drones. So those are threats right now to the American homeland that, to be perfectly honest, we're working on countering, but we don't have great systems that can counter those right now. And those are big threats. And our adversaries, China in particular with hypersonics, but all kinds of countries, Iran certainly with drones, are making advances here. So what this bill does is it tries to set the stage and press for speed to address these challenges, including what we call left of launch capabilities. And by left of launch, I mean cyber approaches to attacking systems even before they get into the air. And it has a whole component on drones, which you've seen. You can focus on a huge, expensive space-based system and then have someone come in with cheap drones. We have provisions that address that. So the threat has definitely evolved way beyond our capability to protect our country, and that's why we have an urgent need to do it. And as I just mentioned, when you watch what's gone on in Israel and Qatar, just in the last 96 hours, it shows that we can do this. We have the technology. Of course, we're a lot bigger country than Israel. But the need is now, and the threat is only going to get worse, which is why we got to act now.
And a little bit earlier, you were talking about the status of the One Big Beautiful bill. Do you
Yeah,
anticipate the Senate being able to get that to the president's desk by July 4th? Is that still the deadline?
that's still the deadline. We're working every day. My team and I have been working on this literally around the clock for months, for months. Uh, this weekend, I was actually home in Alaska, but my staff was here 24/7 almost over the weekend. Yeah, we are 100% focused on this. We'll see how it goes, but right now I think this is shaping up to be a hugely consequential bill for Alaska in terms of our military, in terms of our Coast Guard, in terms of strengthening our healthcare system, which has a lot of challenges. And of course, the fundamental aspect about this bill is not to have the American people have a $5 trillion tax increase. Because if we don't pass this bill, everybody, middle class Alaskans, small businesses, everybody's going to get a tax increase. And of course, there's a huge component in this bill that's exclusively focused on unleashing Alaska's energy potential. So this bill has a huge potential. We're negotiating it still to be one of the most consequential, positive bills for Alaska, I think, in our country's history.
There are also some concerns about negative consequences of the bill, particularly when it comes to SNAP cuts, cuts to Medicaid. You described improvements to our healthcare system. There's folks who are very concerned about the tens of thousands of Alaskans who are also on those programs. What will the impacts of the bill as written be if it reaches the president's desk in terms of what Alaskans who are utilizing SNAP to pay for half of their groceries a month or relying on Medicaid, Medicare for their health care? What do you project the impacts of those cuts will be as written?
Well, we'll wait to the final bill. There's right now in this current bill, there's no cuts to Medicare at all. There's no cuts to Medicaid at all in the current bill for Alaska. A big component of this in terms of the Medicaid reforms are going after what are called provider taxes. This is a way in which states have kind of scammed the federal government to get more federal dollars for their Medicaid system. So there's limits on provider taxes, but Augusta, there's one state in the country that doesn't use provider taxes. It's us, it's Alaska. So when you read about reforms to provider taxes that might limit the growth of Medicaid in certain states, that's not us, because we don't use provider taxes. We're the only state in the United States of America that doesn't use provider taxes, doesn't use what's called directed state payments. So a lot of the reforms that are in there, which are needed, don't impact Alaska at all. I'm actually working on some provisions in this bill. I've been working on them for years to strengthen our Medicaid approach with regard to the federal government. And I think right now it's looking good. The SNAP provisions are being rewritten as we speak. The parliamentarian had ruled some of the provisions there out of order. So those are being rewritten. But I think overall, for our economy, for our healthcare system, for our Coast Guard, for the average Alaskan who doesn't want to see a massive tax increase, this is going to be a really strong bill. By the way, all the really strong provisions for Alaska, unfortunately, my Democratic colleagues in the Senate are trying to get rid of all of them. So it's a real contrast on who wants to grow our economy, strengthen our healthcare system, strengthen the Coast Guard, strengthen the military, and who doesn't want any of those things. It's a very strong contrast right now. I'm fighting against these Democrat senators who want to undermine these really good provisions for Alaska. But overall, we're seeing the trajectory for a very strong bill for our state.
Okay. And let's, can you describe again for me, what specific healthcare improvements will Alaskans see in the One Big Beautiful bill as written, specifically for healthcare improvements?
Well, like I said, right now, in terms of the Medicaid portions, there's, there'll be continued growth in that. There's nothing that impacts in terms of the federal dollars that the state of Alaska is getting. And one of the things that I'm working on right now is trying to increase what's called the federal match for Alaska that I think has a lot of potential. And if that happens, that would be an enormous benefit to our state. There's nothing touching Medicare. There's nothing touching Social Security. You know, there's been some ads out there that were quite deceitful that are trying to scare people. But right now, this is a strong bill. And, you know, one thing I want to emphasize is the other thing is it's going to be very strong for our economy, right? There's a whole section on this that is focused on unleashing Alaska's resource development economy, putting it into law, NPRA, Cook Inlet, ANWR, timber lease sales. This is something that the Biden administration came in for 4 years and tried to crush, tried to undermine, hurt thousands and thousands of jobs of Alaskans when they undermine our resource development economy. This is the exact opposite. And when that happens, you have stronger communities, you have stronger healthcare. You certainly have a situation where a rising tide lifts all boats, and that's what we want to have happen in Alaska, and this bill is going to do that. So I got to run. Thank you very much, Augusta. Appreciate it, and look forward to meeting in person.
I'm excited to meet you in person as well. I have one more question. It's about on the record last week at the the State House Judiciary Committee, a member, a representative on the committee mentioned the possibility of an ICE detention facility being built in Adak. Are you aware of that idea? Is that would you support that?
Yeah, I've never heard of that idea in my life. So,
Okay.
look, one of the things in the bill that we're working hard on that I think we've made really good progress on, and again, this is all going to come out when the final bill is to reopen the naval base at Adak. I've been working on that for 10 years. That's a hugely strategic base that was unfortunately shuttered in the mid-1990s. And when you look at all the activity with regard to Russia and China in the Arctic, in the North Pacific, I've gotten the Indo-PACOM commander, the NORTHCOM commander in testimony in the last 6 months to say we need to reopen the Adak naval base in Alaska because of its huge strategic value for the United States of America, for the Air Force, for the Navy. And right now in the defense portion of this bill, we have significant funds to direct the Navy to do that. And so I've been very, very focused on Adak for years, but I've never heard of anything dealing with an ICE provision. What we want is a military Navy base to project American power from Alaska the way that base used to, and we're on a good pathway to make that happen.